Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973.
Just before I've come to a conversation with a very important government minister about a new initiative, my heart has soared. Now, you might have heard just before the news bulletin, and I take this action very, very rarely. I had to ban a caller from ever listening to the show again. And I told him, because of his views on Ukraine, that they were Nazis and Vladimir Putin was justified in allowing his troops to bomb maternity hospitals. Dave was banned from ever listening to my show again. He can listen to the rest of LBC, but if I ever find him listening to this, I will have to take very strong action. I applaud an email that's come in from Karen. I won't give your last name. Dear Mr. Ferrari, I'm Dave's girlfriend. You've just banned him from listening to your show. Am I banned as well, or could I listen? Could I listen if I made him sit in another room? I'll think about that and let you know. My sense is, as long as Dave doesn't walk in and hear it, you can carry on, Karen. So carry on, Karen. Let's come to other matters. Middle-class cokeheads found with the drug at football matches face a 5-year ban, Boris Johnson will announce today. Anyone convicted of using cocaine at games will also face losing their passport to stop them travelling to overseas games. This comes, of course, in the light of, and we cannot comment on this, but from some fairly ugly scenes that took place at the end of a game between Nottingham Forest and I think Sheffield United, which we can't go because they're before the courts, but clearly there is a need for this, to Crime, Policing and Probation Minister and Conservative MP Kit Malthouse, who joins me now. To those who say, well, why aren't these laws in place anyway for the use of cocaine? How would you respond, Minister? Good morning.
Well, good morning, Nick. Well, we've obviously had football banning orders in place for some time to deal with violence and hate and, in fact, alcohol at football games. But we have seen recently, certainly over the last year or so, as we've come out of lockdown, the police recognising that cocaine in particular, but Class A drugs, are driving a lot of disorder and violence at matches. We saw that at the Euro final, where Louise Casey reckoned that drugs was behind it. So adding them to football banning orders, as we have done, for example, with online hate, seems like a step forward to bring the idea that A, there's consequence, but B, that we can prevent violence at games.
And will there be random searches, Minister? How will you discover if football fans are taking the drug, are in possession?
Well, obviously, the police already do a certain amount of that at football games. As you will know, there are often sniffer dogs out and about. But this means that there can be much more meaningful consequence than there has been in the past. So where, for example, somebody at a football game is found in possession of Class A drugs, they will normally be put forward by the police and have a conviction. They'll get a fine or possibly a community order if it's a first offence, or even prison if it's a future offence. Now, though, we can add this notion that they would not go to a football match for 3 to 5 years as an addition to their sentence, as a preventative measure for violence, but also because it's part of a message that we want to give more widely in the country, that the sort of middle class, recreational, whatever the word you want to use it, the casual use of Class A drugs is driving an enormous amount of demand. Now, I know, Nick, that you are lucky enough to live in the capital. You will have seen last year 30 young people lie dead in London, stabbed. Many of them were dragged into this awful drugs trade, supplying cocaine, heroin and crack to all sorts of users, high and humble, of all kinds. So everybody needs to recognise there's consequence to their consumption of drugs.
Lastly on this, is it fair to say some of these middle-class football fans, Minister, actually have the blood of those young men on their hands who lost their lives in London last year?
They're definitely complicit in an appalling supply chain that brings cocaine from South America through Africa and Europe and into the UK. And along the way, people are exploited and brutalised and often killed. Corruption is endemic. The money flows to get that stuff from point A to point B. It is a horrible, awful trade involving serious and organised crime. And if you are taking those drugs, I'm afraid you are fueling those awful businesses and their activities.
You're hosting the National Drug Summit in London when you'll refer to this. Also, on this, do you have the law, is it within the law, to take a convicted football fan's passport away so she cannot travel overseas? You have the powers so to do.
So a football banning order does require a football fan to surrender their passport if their team is playing overseas, so they cannot travel and perpetrate disorder. Football banning orders are, in essence, preventative. The idea is that you have a football banning order to prevent you going to a match so you don't cause violence, disorder, or hatred, or whatever it might be. And so, yes, in certain circumstances, they can surrender their passports so they can't travel overseas.
A couple of other matters that while I have the benefit of you on the line, Minister, Police officers were told yesterday to use their discretion when deciding whether to prosecute shoplifters amid the cost of living crisis. Andy Cook, a man I'm sure you know well, the new police watchdog, risked raising the wrath of retailers. Who wrote that? As he suggested officers should weigh up whether it's best to proceed. Your view as policing minister?
So I have a lot of respect for Andy Cook. He's a fellow Scouser. We get on very well, but I'm afraid I find it a bit old-fashioned thinking. We first of all believe that the law should be blind, and police officers should operate without fear or favour in the prosecution of the law. But secondly, also that it's not quite right to say that as the economy fluctuates, so does crime. We've seen economic problems in the past or not when crime has risen or not. Our job is to get ahead of these kind of crimes, particularly acquisitive neighbourhood crimes, which are now down very significantly post-pandemic, assisted, I have to say, by the pandemic, but to drive them down even further. And we could do that in smart ways. So, for example, you said the drug summit today. We know that 50% of acquisitive crime, burglary, robbery, shoplifting, is driven by addiction to heroin and crack, right? If we can treat that addiction, then we can reduce crime. As you will know, Nick, we are GPS tagging acquisitive criminals as they come out of prison, burglars, robbers, to make sure they don't reoffend. We know where they are 24 hours a day. We can put them time and place next to a crime. These kind of smart solutions will help us beat, I'm afraid, that slightly 1970s assumption. We actually think there's a growing body of evidence that says poverty doesn't cause crime. Actually, crime and violence cause poverty. And where you remove the crime and the violence, very often people and neighbourhoods fly and prosper. That's not to say there isn't a cost of living challenge. Of course there is. But our job is to make sure we drive down crime, notwithstanding that challenge for everybody.
So the army of men and women who own the shops, the businesses, the news agents, whatever it might be, know that with this government, you will make sure the police do not turn a blind eye to someone who runs out with a loaf of bread and 6 eggs.
Absolutely right. And in fact, I wrote to chief constables just a year or so ago saying that they should not be ignoring those small, seemingly small crimes. I mean, I chair a thing called the National Retail Crime Steering Group, which is looking specifically at this part of the public realm, primarily because we've seen too much violence in a retail environment where shop owners, retail staff are subjected to violence, but also because we want to drive down crime more carefully. The absence of crime is a necessary precondition for financial prosperity, right? And that has to be our primary aim.
OK. Another police force where there could be some backlash is Cambridge. Superintendent James Sutherland wearing a police helmet in the colours of the LGBT union. Have you seen that picture yet, Minister?
I haven't, no.
Let me help you. So this is the superintendent. Hopefully you can now see that photograph. If he were to arrest me for drugs offences, would I take this man seriously?
Well, I don't know, Nick, I'll have to look up that story. I don't know what circumstances he's wearing that helmet. As it happened, I was with Cambridgeshire Police on Monday in Peterborough, and I can tell you that they are bending every sinew this week on Operation Sceptre,
when they're
which
not
is our
wearing funny
national...
hats.
Was our national campaign around knife crime, and I was very impressed with the work they're doing. I'll have to look up that story.
I'm not trying to hijack you, Minister, but this is to support International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia and Biphobia that Superintendent James Sutherland warned at. Cambridge Police saying it's committed to being inclusive. The helmet had been made by local students. Well, there is a very small percentage of these people in this country who think they're cats or foxes. Should he wear cat's whiskers if we're going to be that inclusive?
Well, Nick, obviously the police have to work hard to build trust with all the various groups that make up the great tapestry of British society. If he's wearing that kind of uniform in a community environment, that's obviously a matter of his chief constable. What I do know is
would
that
you
if he's got
sanction
to the
it?
rank,
Would you sanction
hold
it?
on, Nick. What I do know is that if he's got to the rank of superintendent, that means he's had an impressive career thus far, and I can guarantee you, as well as wearing that helmet, he will have nicked an awful lot of villains during his career.
And that is good to hear. But would you sanction that? Would you sign off on him wearing that helmet? What does it do for the image of the cop?
Well, I'm assuming that his chief constable has approved that variation to the uniform regulations, Nick. And
would you have approved such a variation, Minister?
Well, I'm not a chief constable. I have to respect the operations. So, I mean, look, I'm a bit old-fashioned. I like brass buttons and a smart
Absolutely.
look. So I probably would have erred in that particular. But look, as I say, he's a senior police officer. He will have done a lot of villain nicking during his career. I have to salute him for his service and treat this as one of those minor issues.
Final question. You shared with me, I knew you were from Liverpool, I'd forgotten though, but I've got to ask, Mr. Malthouse, are you a red or a blue?
I'm surprised you have to ask me. Of course, I'm a red.
So what happens on the weekend? Pipped at the post, Liverpool just coming up short of mighty Manchester City, Minister? Or will there be some miraculous turnaround?
Oh, look, I'm a Scouser, so I believe in miracles. And I think that City are going to falter. The boys from Anfield will triumph and will do the quadruple this season.
OK. What about this? £100 bet each way to a charity of your choice, police charity. I'll give you 100, you give me 100. Sadly, Liverpool will come up short on Saturday. Manchester City will be the Premier League champions. So we'll have £100 bet to the police, widows and orphans. What do you say? What do you say, Mr Malthouse?
Deal.
Kit Malthouse, Crime Policing and Probation Minister, appearing here on LBC. We're at 1 minute after 8. The news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, police officers are being urged to use discretion when deciding whether to prosecute people who steal in order to eat.